Do you ever hear anybody say, wow, you got to see this movie. You can see all the detail in the highlights. Wow, what a great movie. This is $2.5 million right here. This is the movie I made. These 4 reels are the film intro negative, and these 4 reels are the soundtrack. Over 300 people worked on this for over a year.
That's nice, guys. Come on. Thank you. Let's shoot it.
Action. Too much smoke. 40 bucks. Okay, go. Smoke.
This was not shot in RAW. This is film. And you had to expose it properly. And you didn't even know if you did until the next day when you saw the dailies. We couldn't depend on computers to bring out the detail in the shadows because there were no computers. You had to know your f-stops, your ASA, your shutter angle, proper lighting and color. And you only had one chance to get it right. Nowadays, people want you to believe that shooting RAW and using logs and LUTs are superior. Well, having the ability to fix something later on does not make it superior. Getting it right in the first place does. Was this shot in RAW? Does this have 15 stops of dynamic range? Was this shot in S-Log or C-Log or B-RAW? No? Then how come these are some of the most famous photos in history? If high dynamic range is what makes a movie good, then that would mean Sin City is a terrible movie because it's super high contrast. And don't say the green screens were shot in RAW, I'm talking about the final look. Or how about this movie? This has less dynamic range than a pocket camera, but that's the style they wanted. Must be a bad movie, huh? Or how about this one? Must be another bad movie. Everyone talks about making your YouTube videos more cinematic. You think you need to shoot 4K to be taken seriously? The effects in the original Jurassic Park were 1K. Great filmmaking has nothing to do with megapixels or dynamic range. You see this? It's called a slide. Everyone getting into photography should be forced to use these first. Once you take the picture, there is nothing you can do to fix it. I learned photography shooting 35mm slides and transparencies with my 2.25 and my Mamiya 645 and my Speed Graflex 4x5. Kodachrome had better color, but I always shot in Ektachrome because I could see the results within an hour. And I'd study the results, I'd learn from it, I adjusted, I improved the skills, and after a while you learn how to light and expose things properly under any condition. And without expensive lights and cameras, just using basic tricks and available resources. My entire life has been dedicated to celebrating, capturing, and creating beauty, especially images. I was painting before I could walk, and I didn't have a lot of money, and for most of my life, I wondered if my paintings would improve if I used better paintbrushes or paint. And when I finally did, it made no difference. Most of the time, the tools don't matter, and those who obsess over tools and not creativity and resourcefulness will never get as far. Leonardo da Vinci created masterpieces with a stick of charcoal. Some of my best work was done when I lived in a tiny little 400 square foot apartment. I could spend months talking about what I did in that little studio apartment. And I did pickup shots for the big studios in that little thing with using nothing but colored paper, saran wrap, and hot glue. I love filmmaking. Back in the early 90s, I saved up every penny I had and I bought a Russian clone of an Arri 2C 35mm film camera. As in real film, as in you better know your f-stop, shutter speeds, and ASA or else your shot is ruined. There was no computers back then. Hollywood did just fine without RAW, logs, LUTs for over 100 years, and some of the most beautiful images to ever grace the silver screen were created. I spent over 30 years in Hollywood before computers ever entered the picture. I learned all the tricks on how to darken skies, lighten dark shadows, and paint with light. True filmmaking is a craft, not something you do by pushing buttons on a computer. I spent months in deluxe labs color timing every shot in my movie. How many people even know what color timing is, or internegative, or telecine? I used to race cars in the early 80s, and I remember one day at the racetrack, there was this beefed up, tricked out American muscle car with big fat tires, super loud V8 engine, and then this tiny little red shoebox from Japanese car, the Mazda R100 comes up next to it. It's like this big. And it was so funny. When they took off, the big American car was spinning its tires and making all this smoke and sounding all impressive and macho, and the little tiny red car went pew! It just like a bullet, and it blew my mind. I learned what a rotary engine was, and I ended up buying a car just like that. That was a moment in my life that just inspired me on so many levels. People put so much value on tech and specs and horsepower and all that macho shit. I love watching the underdog beat the big guy. I had 2 Lotus Turbo Esprits in the early 90s. It was only 4 cylinders, but pound for pound, that little 4-cylinder engine had more power and was faster than a 12-cylinder Ferrari Testarossa, the big hyped up car that everyone was talking about at the time. That's why I love my little Lotus cars. They were the little guy that beat the big, loud, hyped up thing that everyone was talking about. And there's a lesson in that that carries over even into photography. I've been to some of the most exotic places in the world, taking pictures Kara and I will remember for a lifetime. We trekked custom-made costumes and gear to the top of a volcano. We were 10,000 feet up above the clouds. We did photo shoots deep in tropical jungles, on exotic beaches at Marlon Brando's private island. We went all over Europe. We hiked blistering sand dunes in the middle of Death Valley, Valley of Fire, Red Rock Canyon, and all over the desert Southwest. We took tens of thousands of pictures, and all of them were 8-bit JPEGs. I don't shoot RAW. I don't need to. I can get exactly what I want because I know how to light and expose properly under any circumstances, even the harshest conditions in the world. Some people say, yeah, but it takes lots of lights and expensive equipment to get the lighting to look good. You see this shot? It's lit by some tin foil stuck on a piece of foam core, and the camera is a cheap micro four thirds camera with a kit lens. Were my paintings painted with expensive paintbrushes and paints? No, I didn't have any money back then. It's not the tool, it's what you do with it. It's how you use it. That's what makes all the difference in the world. How many slick Hollywood movies have you seen with amazing special effects and camera work and lighting, but the movie was boring as hell? And then some of the most memorable movies out there sometimes didn't have great lighting or camera work. Have you ever heard anybody say, wow, you gotta see this movie. You can see all the detail and the highlights. Wow, what a great movie. Technology is great. It can help make life easier. But when you focus on technology and not originality, heart, story, and emotional message, you are asking for trouble. No matter how slick the technology is that you use, it cannot make your work a masterpiece. Never depend on technology to make you a good photographer or filmmaker. Depending on technology is dangerous.
Is this the part where I come in?
No, not yet. There's a satisfaction in knowing you did it on your own. You didn't have it done for you. You don't need raw LUTs and logs. You don't need expensive lights and big studios to brighten your shadows and darken your highlights and even out the lighting. You don't need lots of money. It's amazing what you can do with some tin foil, some cardboard, and some wax paper. A good soldier is not effective by depending on equipment. He is effective by being resourceful with whatever is available at the moment to get the job done. Like rolling up a page from a magazine because you have nothing else to create a snoot that makes a tiny beam of light to light up someone's face on location. To be successful, you need to understand the difference between nerds and artists. Artists are not afraid to take chances, to try new things, and their main focus is to tell a story, to elicit an emotion. Nerds, on the other hand, focus all their energies on specs and numbers and test charts and whatever is new and complex and expensive. They compare everything and they overanalyze. Artists don't care about any of that. They don't compare themselves or their work with anyone. They don't care how many levels of gray matter are in a micro Jimmy. They can take a piece of garbage and make it look amazing using a 50-year-old camera they bought at a thrift store. And they can tell a story about that piece of garbage that would tear your heart out. Slow motion shots and blurry backgrounds do not make someone a great filmmaker. Special effects, gamma curves, megapixels, and dynamic range don't make a movie great. Storytelling does. You want to get noticed? Throw away the spec sheet and start listening to your heart. What triggers you? What makes you laugh? What makes you cry? That's what the world wants to see. They want to hear your heartbeat. The people out there are looking for a reason to live. They don't care what paintbrush you're using, but they want to see you paint something real, something from your heart, something that they can relate to, something that makes life worth living. And you can do that with a cheap camera from 20 years ago with no dynamic range. Good photography and filmmaking does not cost money, but it does require your very soul.